This right here gonna be one of the last videos I ever send you. So do what you get here. I'm here with the Bible, but I want to do some prelims to get a few things out the way. There's been a lot of back and forth between Kanye West and Pete Davidson about who are the real people, and I'm here to say neither. I don't believe there is such a thing. I believe the lost tribes are exactly that. They're the lost to history. And the notion that nobody would ever choose to be Jewish is proof and false by Madonna and Sammy Davis Jr. and various other people, Amari Stoudemire's parents, and even Jedediah Malik's parents to a certain extent. But one can't really convert if their parents were born into the religion. And so preliminarily, I'd like to say that to get it out the way, there isn't a person to be looking for because that's not what the prophecies mean. And that is because the history of Judaism is disparate and fragmented. And there was a time when it was a seed relation that largely died off within the first 2,000 years, let alone the second, since Abraham. And by now, surely, but it became a nation like 1,000 years later, like after the the time in Egypt, after the time of Judges, it became like a nation with a king like everyone else. And this fell apart. There was various invasions and captivities, such as the Neo-Syrian, Neo-Babylonian, that it became a religion. Uh, but Ezra was obviously incredibly sensitive to the idea. But I want to know why Ezra didn't say anything about the Idumeans in what's considered First Esdras or Ezra one or Ezra, the Book of Ezra. And if the people of Judea rebelled against the Romans, and King Herod was a foreigner, especially from being from the Idumeans. Some would want to say the epitome of a foreigner. Um, because the Esau has some of the strictest prophecies against him, but I would say that it's irrelevant because I don't believe these things are in the future, especially Romans 11, because Romans 11 doesn't say anything about the second coming, like per se, as would First Thessalonians 4 or First Corinthians 15. And for this reason, I would say that the time of the Gentiles coming to an end is completely independent, not related to uh, the time of the Gentiles in Revelation, and or even what do you call this? Luke 21, and this time of the Gentiles in Romans 11, I think Paul is making an argument that hasn't become true, And therefore, I honestly might go to say that First Thessalonians 4 and First Corinthians 15 might have been interpolations that the church put on. I don't know if Paul was that into eschatology, and if he is, I'd like to believe he was in line with the end of eschatology, coming to that time and believing that he was in the last days. And even the church fathers in the other epistles would believe in it was the last days was then. So I think it's largely irrelevant. Like, I don't think we need to rebuild the temple or have a people there, and even the people that do, you know, without rapture, a lot of it doesn't even really make much sense anyway, because you know, like, what happens to all these people who aren't the blind? So this blindness and like we can't even take the apostles to be necessarily like meaning pre-exilic prophecies are now applying post-exilically. I mean, they would have the hindsight of Ezra, and the restoration. But so I think like a lot of these dispensationalists would jump around a lot, like to, well, I don't see how this prophecy in the past, talking about, world without end over the whole world, it was really come to pass. So therefore, there must be a future, and deduce it that way. But I'm here to say I don't think prophecy works like that at all. Like, Don Preston does, like, in a sense, or at least Don K. Preston is making an argument for prophecy. And so he's saying Daniel prophesies the Roman Empire, and Jesus coming in the Roman Empire is therefore this talked about Messiah, and he's relies heavily on Daniel. And I do believe that he's right, like, in a sense that the New Testament is making that argument, clear references to Daniel, for the last days. And I know he's making a very good point that this is what the Bible is saying. But I disagree with him because I don't believe in prophecy. I believe in free will, and if it's free will, it can't be decided yet. And for that reason, I think Paul, even though he was partial, as James says, show no partiality. But even though he was a bit partial, he wished himself accursed for his brethren, as he says in Romans, that, at the end of the day, he really didn't. Like, he said in 2 Corinthians 11, I speak as a fool, though boasting, and I think Paul was exactly this. He was very Jewish in as much as he was applying the old prophecies to his time period, and he was usefully using his knowledge to garner support from other people, largely in the nations. And I don't think it's true that people outside didn't have any knowledge of these prophecies, because, I mean, like, Titus probably came from Crete, because of Isaiah reading these things. And I'm sure, like, even the Magi's, and or on the Magi's or something, you know what I mean? Like, or even if Herod was from the outside, somehow he's, you know what I mean? Like, you have all these families, like in the time of Ezra, that are speaking Ashdodish, but they still, like, these, if the mother is going to determine your children's religion, then these women would be, raising their children Jewish because these were in the group with Ezra. These are the ones associated with him. And Ezra is very Jewish because he is of this idea of the seed. And the seed is why he probably added Genesis 38. Because it says in Genesis 38 that, what's it say in Genesis 38? It says, let's just go there real quick. All right, it says in Genesis 38, when the time of her delivery came, she was found to have twins in her womb. While she was giving birth, the midwife, one of them put out his hand. The midwife, taking the crimson thread, tied it out first. But withdrew his hand, his brother came out. And she said, "What a breach!" And she called himself Perez. And this red thread is associated with the scapegoat and Esau. And so this is largely the role of Jesus, whose name is an anagram of Esau. And he was sacrificed outside the temple. And it says in 2 Chronicles chapter 11, I think, that Jeroboam, the great sin that all the kings committed of Israel, Jeroboam, made these statues and things to the satyrs, the demons, the goats. And when Ezekiel is talking about the regathering after the remembrance, that there will be a separation of the goats from the sheep in the building of the new kingdom. And I don't think this was true for Herod. I think that this was true for basically never. Like, just as any prophecy for a future restoration of a earthly kingdom is a never. It's never going to happen because all of this has been lost to history, and that's what Jesus represents. He represents two types of Israel. Jesus is Israel. There's the dead Israel that of the destroyed temple, and this is the only, if there is a Western hypothesis for the origins of people, this was the only Semitic religion that you're allowed to hold, is that on the day where the temple was destroyed, and remembrance of the end of that, and how this is something that was true in the Old Testament, that David, in Psalm 22, that this was kind of the strength of Judaism in the first place, that even after the temple was destroyed, the first one, that it lived on through people's, imaginations and hearts. And so for that reason, represents an immortal kingdom, and it's not by sight, it's by faith, that it might not be what you see. And so this is the other aspect of Jesus, the one that's going to come in a later day and set everything right. So this is very few chapters of the Bible. This is mostly dealing with like the last two chapters of the Bible and maybe a few select verses elsewhere. And so that but this was only minorly true for the Old Testament too. A lot of the Old Testament is actually oracles against Israel, because Israel was raising up patriarchs and prophets and saints who were attacked by the devil and who were attacked by Israel, and they would have groups that would esteem the things that these people said at a later date and memorialize them. And so their king is one of the past, a great king from 1,000 years prior, and a king that will come again. And so even if I do concede that they rejected Herod, that there would be no king without this. So it would be some king who died or some king who will come again, at least in a Roman perspective, from reading through all their literature and trying to understand who their king is. And for the reason, you have the story Ezra put into Genesis 38. And this is, he probably put 37 in there too, because he's the one that likes to say how he's different than the Midianites, when we all know that Midianites is where this all started from. And we know that there's no distinction between Esau, so I think this is where, like a lot of these prophecies of a future division from Esau come about. But we all know that that the Torah put them side by side, that they had been so joined to one another that at that time period there was little anyone could do to separate them. And if there is real people descended from them today, it would be just the same. I mean, especially when you're dealing with haplogroups and stuff like that, unless you believe in a serpent seed doctrine. But I don't believe that's Bible. I think a lot of the racialistic stuff in the Bible is based on faith. Like Abraham was chosen by faith and Ham was cursed by faith. Like it says in Ginsburg's Legends of the Jedis that Shem actually walked first to put and more directly to put the covering over the naked father, and that's why Shem was even favored over Japheth. But kind of like the new Pinocchio movie with Tom Hanks, it's like they added a bunch of stuff to it to try to work through why stuff was happening, but it's just like, well, I kind of liked it better when it's vague, because when you explain it, the reason sounds kind of dumb. Like, and this was like when I read the Talmud, it's just like a lot of these explanations just sound really jingoistic. Like it's like, oh, just because God favored us, so that. And it doesn't make any sense. It's like, well, God just can do anything, and so if He likes you better, then that's just what it will be, And so we see that he definitely, Judah got a wet with a Canaanite. So that would probably be, if Judah being, described the same way like David, ruddy, and being down there in the deserts of near, Esau, but near Seir, and let's say Herod become the king. If people ever doubted his lineage, he could just say, well, matter of fact, turns out that what are they saying? If anybody doubted his lineage, they could just be like, well, yeah, I can see, there were Jebusites in Jerusalem, and judges does say we didn't get rid of the Jebusites. But if we really show how much we're against them, and like parts of Isaiah where they just really go into, how David, really changed. But David was from the outside. Like David lived with the Philistines, and he was excommunicated even after being king. And so the thing about it is, that's what you get way down by Jerusalem in the Yatter Hoochie, because that's going to be where the water hardly goes, and most people lived around um, rivers. So there was like the settled people, and there were the nomads, and the settled people were the Canaanites. So they were the same people, but Cain means tool. The sons of Cain, the ones that have the instruments, that's the ones that had the instruments of tools. And so they had like hoes and like for digging dirt and stuff like that. And that's why their symbol is for their first letter is shaped like that. And there are parallels with the descendants of Sheth, too. And there's a bunch of switching up and flips, and especially with the prophets, that when they can teach you to look at yourself as the other, you get some deeper insights. And so with Judah, you have, if they suspect you say you were Canaanite, you're just like them. You have an argument. This is argumentative. This is yes, 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 yes. Of course, I did marry her and had lots of children with her, but God didn't favor those children. Those ones all died, like the sons of Aaron, that were swallowed up by the earth. Yeah, those ones all died because they didn't adhere to the Levirate laws of Assyria. But I hold to the Levirate laws, therefore I'm going to be a royal priesthood, because I have honored my family, which is my lineage. So the lineage started to branch out, but then it went right back, to the stock again. And so, because what he did was this baby with the cord and everything, it's kind of like Lot, where Lot slept with his daughters. Well, this is him sleeping with his daughter-in-law, but it was all a secret how it all went down until one day it was revealed because of his keeping of the covenant. And so this is shows you how they were like Joseph, using craftiness to, like Joseph was down in prison and now he's before the Pharaoh, and now he's saying all this whole story about how the Pharaoh needs to during the time of abundance basically take 20% of all the people's food and put it in each of these cities for storage. And so over 7 years you have, like, I don't know, like a little bit more, like a year's worth or two, a couple years worth or something. And then on the years that, like, nobody can grow enough, right? 7 years later, well, they have all these storehouses. So I don't think that the Israelites built these storehouses, which were pyramids. I mean, that's what they built the pyramids for. They became necropolises as rich people were hungry. They ate all the food and sold it all, and then they died, and the few loyalists that they had left, just buried them in there and said, nobody can use this anymore. But, like, that's so I don't think the Israelites built the pyramids. I think they were there, like, long before. Not long before, but, like, maybe around the same time period. But this isn't a real story. I mean, this is a analogy. And this decorative way of saying it has, kind of a twisting to it that, yeah, there's a lot of truth to it. Like, when they say in Exodus that they were given the best land of Goshen and stuff like that, I mean, there's the truth of it, but this building the pyramids, that's not even in the Bible anyways. Like that's just like what a lot of people want to say, but I don't even think that's how it goes, because it says right here, it says, this advice pleased Pharaoh and his officials. What is it? Pharaoh should also take action to appoint overseers so as to regiment the land during the 7 years of abundance. So I don't know if these overseers were like his brothers or something. You can't say they were Israelites because there was only like the guys in Egypt, right? There's only the guys in Canaan right now, which is like 11 of them or 12 of them or something. And what to do? So you go down to how this work out. This is crazy right here. Listen to how this work out. So Joseph was like running it. Joseph, he got, just like Daniel, he got his ring, he got his robe, and it says, and Pharaoh had ordered Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them the holdings in Egypt on the pick of the land in the region of Ramses, which is anachronistic. And Joseph sustained his father and his brothers and his father's whole house hold down to the youngest with food. Since there was no food in all the countries, they eating good, even though nobody else is. And there's extreme severity in the famine. And so, they're eating good, and then there's only 70 of them. But you wait 400 years later, you wait a couple, like 100 years later or something, and all of a sudden 70 people turns into millions, while they weren't eating good. They weren't eating good. Like what it says right here in Legends of the Jedis. It says, but the Egyptians were a little concerned whether or not they derive profit from the forced labor of the children of Israel. Their main object was to hinder their increase, and the Pharaoh therefore issued an order that they were not to be permitted to sleep at their own homes, that they might be deprived of the opportunity to have intercourse with their wives. The officers executed the will of the king, telling the Hebrews that the reason there was the loss of too much time going to and fro, which would prevent the completing required tale of bricks. Thus, the Hebrew husband were kept apart from their wives, but they were compelled to sleep on the ground away from their habitations. But God spake unto the father Abraham, I promised, and I will make children numerous stars to contrive plants, but we shall see the word Sam that the more the Egyptians afflicted them, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad, and they continued to increase in spite of Pharaoh's command. And those who did not complete the required tale of bricks were to be immured in the buildings between the layers of bricks, and great was the number of Israelites that lost their lives this way. So they're getting killed, can't sleep with their wives, and yet they're still getting more plentiful. And this is why I don't believe in the Western hypothesis, the so-called Rhineland hypothesis. This is what Pete Davidson would have you believe, that there were just certain people that migrated from Israel and walked all the way over to Spain and then walked over to Rome. And because really the problem is they don't have anybody living in Europe for the first millennium. But in the second millennium, in Al-Andalus, which is Spain, under the Moorish rule, there you have people like Rashi and Rambam and stuff start to center, not originating in, some traveling person, or in a group, but scholarship, people studying Hebrew. And this is same with Felix Pratensis. I mean, this is somebody studying Hebrew. This is where we get it from today. They use Latin to do taxonomy and stuff, and that's because it's a dead language. It's not used, so the meaning can't change and confuse people. So that's what happens with dead languages. You don't use them anymore. No one's going to pick up and start using a dead language. and and the spiritual even more so. Like, why would how languages don't evolve like that? You don't just write languages. They happen in a grassroots kind of way. So I'm looking in this book here. The Jedi's and Modern Capitalism by Werner Schomburg. And it says the first event to be recalled, an event from worldwide import, was expulsion of the Jedi's from Spain, 1492, and from Portugal, 1495. It should never be forgotten that on the day before Columbus set sail from Palos to discover America, August 3rd, 1492, 300,000 Yehudim. So this is 500 years. This is like 400 years after Rashi and Rambam, a few hundred years. So I'm arguing that it started with just a few, and then over a few hundred years became like 300,000, and largely by conversion, or all by conversion rather. And this was started by Moorish people, and this is not the argument made by racists. Racists will say quite the opposite. David Duke and all of them will say quite the opposite as I do. It's because they love each other. Like Chabad and David Duke love each other because they just go back and forth. You know, Farrakhan and Jonathan Greenblatt, they love each other because they just go back and forth. I'm trying to put an end to this back and forth. I'm not trying to speak on controversy. That's my whole point, is I'm not going to weigh in on who are the real people because it's irrelevant. But preliminarily, I'm going to say just that even if it were true that there were something like such that, oh, there was, some seed of David, on some future date that has some special right, which I don't believe whatsoever. Even if that were true, I'm trying to show you real quick that, one, I don't believe there are races of people. I don't believe that was ever the point to begin with. But secondly, that the people who you say are that race of people aren't telling a cogent story, because you have one of these population growths like I've showed with Lewis Ginsburg and the legends, that it doesn't. You'd have to have some divine providence to be blessed with such fruitfulness, and so you have 300,000 kicked out of Spain. As far as I know, you can't hardly see in Germany many Sephardi, like it was just a Christian society. This was like after Gregory the Great, and Germany was pretty much all Christian. And this is under the Holy Roman Empire, right? And this is the First Reich. And it's a nor that in the years during which Vasco da Gama searched for and found the sea passage to West Indies, the Jedi's were driven from other parts of the Pyrenean Peninsula, which is Spain. Okay, and then he has a reference. So I go back to the reference. So this is near the beginning of the book. It says, to the give the numbers of Jedi's who were scattered in different lands is impossible. Attempts to do so have indeed been made. This book was written a long time ago, by the way. This book was written in the 19th century. So attempts to do so have indeed been made, but the real results were nothing more than conjectures. Perhaps the best of these is I lobe le nombre de juifs de Castile at de Espagne moyen âgé en rue de Juiz, 1887. And it says Lowell Pass bases a good many of his calculations on the number of Jedis resident in different localities today. Nevertheless, I shall give these results of his researches. He believes that there were 235 in Spain and Portugal in 1492, 235K. The number had remained pretty constant for some 200 years. Of the total, 160 lived in Castile. Okay, blah, blah, blah. So what happened to them? He said 50,000 were baptized, 20,000 perished, 165,000 immigrated. But most of these went to Turkey. 2,000 to Egypt, Tripoli, 10,000 to Algiers, 20,000 to Morocco, right? 3,000 to France, 9,000 to Italy, 25,000 to Holland. So it seems like if as far as Europe goes, they went to Holland. 25,000 of them. So how does 25,000 turn into millions? That's like a huge population growth of biblical proportions, especially if they're confined to walled-in ghettos and things like this. I mean, it doesn't really add up. And why are they all in Russia and Poland? So many of them in Czechoslovakia and Hungary. If they got moved to France and Italy and Holland, and they weren't told to leave Holland. Holland was quite welcoming. This is and so this is largely where through the Jews of Holland and England is where we get free trade economics, which destroyed all the monarchies we had before. And now we don't live in divine rule societies. Now we don't even live in, like, for instance, United States was a bit of an experimental place. I mean, this is even before the French Revolution. So with liberty, fraternity, and brotherhood, or whatever it was. I don't know. Peace, land, and bread for all I care. But this was when King Louis and Marie Antoinette and all them, that's when they got theirs. And so yeah, I believe that it's 20,000 people who may have been Moors from the jump that moved to Holland is where we get the beginning of the reason why people would want to join on and convert like Madonna did, and all the wealth associated with the Rothbergs and stuff like that. So why are all these ones in East Germania that didn't want to learn Cyrillic, which is basically Poland today and Russia? I mean, they used Hebrew, and that's why it's called anti-Semitic, not because there's any reason to believe that there's some racial categorization. Maybe some racists did believe that, but like I said, that's kind of even what Big H, that awful guy that we're not allowed to talk about, that I don't like him at all, of course, but that's what they say about, that's what he would say. They would say this is a race of people, and I don't say that. That's not what I'm saying. But it was people, at least according to that book I showed you, that would buy and sell like covenants. I mean, the book of Tobit, this is where we get the certificate of deposit. The reason why we have edges on quarters and dimes is they used to be silver, and coin clippers couldn't deface the edges without making the coin look different. And so in France, instead of 25 thousand. Let's just call it mil. I mean, maybe I was reading it wrong. Anyways, maybe it was mil. Maybe that's how French people say that, thousand or something. I don't know. But 28 million people in France in 1800. Well, you go back, you go down to the turn of the millennium. It's only double, 56 million people. But somehow you got 20,000 people turn, 50. Maybe they came from Turkey, so maybe 100,000, maybe 150,000. Who knows? Turning into millions of people in a location you wouldn't even expect them to pop up in the first place with no story of how they even got there. And the whole belief is based on this anti-biblical belief that they wouldn't note that they don't. Well, we don't proselytize, and we tell people you don't want to join. So, well, that's not what the Bible says, for one. And secondly, the whole belief that nobody would ever convert to Judaism, especially with the wealth of the Rothschilds and the ability to make money based on rules in Christian society where they could take on a special protected citizenship as long as you wore special anti-Semitic clothing and stuff like that. So for this reason, like, I think it's very anti-Semitic to say nobody would ever choose to be Jewish. I mean, you could choose to be Jews. It's fine. Das choose? Choose? This is news. This is give you the blues. What's so bad about that? Why is it so impossible to believe? And so, especially knowing the church wanted to excommunicate a lot of people, especially for their rules against making money and stuff like that. So why is it so hard to believe? So I wanted to go over a couple Bible verses real quick. And this is why the destruction of Jerusalem was not racial. It was based on their belief system. And the whole purpose of why Jesus came was to get rid of this belief system, and not to do away with it, but to improve on it and to give way to what may come next. And so this is where Paul was wrong, is he believed the new way of what came next was his way. And this was getting all kinds of people on board and fulfilling a lot of the prophecies. And he believed this would cause such jealousy that this is where Paul was wrong, that the natural reaction of all of this favor in your name, that this will eventually cause so much jealousy that as Christianity is losing its popularity, let's say, I don't think Paul even would fathom that 2,000 years later, people all over the world would just be into his religion, that he was instrumentally the one who pushed it into the world. He's maybe the most influential person of all time. And he was flat out wrong. He believed that this lack of favor would eventually cause Jewish folk to be one against another, that there'd be two in a bed and one would leave, and they would no longer, that this would basically tear apart their families. And this was kind of like an aesthetic doomsday cult, that this is all going to, especially coming with the Jewish-Roman War that was in the near future, as that was getting heated up. And we saw what happened in Masada, and we saw how people burned down Jerusalem and stuff like that. We know that it wasn't good, and it was definitely changing the course of history for sure. And because Judaism wasn't a group of people in a small area on the periphery of the Roman Empire, it was a focal point of the war of East versus West. and the Persians lost it at this time period, and it was no longer right to left, it was left to right. And this war between East and West, the battle line pushed even further east to where even Jordan was a Western country until the Islamic revival. And that, after a few hundred years, caused a sharp, sudden response by the West in the form of the Crusades. And so what did Joseph do? He says, Joseph gathered in as payment rations that were being dispensed and all the money that was being found in Egypt and Canaan, and he put in the Pharaoh's palace. So he's collecting taxes. When all the money in Egypt and Canaan was spent, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and give us food, and we shall perish under your eyes, for our money is gone. Since your money is gone, Joseph replied, give me your livestock, and I will sell you bread in return for your livestock. So they brought the livestock to Joseph, and he sold them food in return for their horses, their flocks, and their sheep, their herds of cattle, their donkeys. Thus he got them through that year with bread in exchange for their livestock. When that year ended, they came to him in the following one and said, we cannot hide from my lord that with the money spent on and our livestock made over to my lord, there's nothing left to put my lord's disposal except our bodies and our farmland. This is how the pyramids got made, by Joseph enslaving them. Joseph enslaved them. It wasn't Israelites being enslaved. It was Joseph using this game to play these folk. And so why should we and our land perish before your very eyes? Take us and our land in exchange for food, and we shall become Pharaoh's slaves, and our land as his property. Only give us seed that we may survive and not perish, that our land may not turn into waste. Thus Joseph acquired all the farmland in Egypt for Pharaoh, since with the famine too much for them to bear, every Egyptian sold his field, so the land passed over to Pharaoh, and the people were reduced to slavery from one end of Egypt's territory to the other. And this is before God killed all the firstborn and gave them pestilences and everything. But I'm here to say it was the avenging angel. It wasn't my God. They might have been working together, but remember, Satan was in heaven at one time. So, and this was way back then. So, and the people were reduced to slavery. Only the priests' lands Joseph did not take over. Since the priests, because that's how Joseph got in. Joseph's family, the Levites, and all they're close. These stories of Jochebed and all that, they're taken right from Sargon. This is Semitic royalty. This is the priesthood, and they're down in Egypt, the Hyksos, the shepherd kings, and they're closely related to the Canaanites and the Idumeans too, but they're kind of the Goldilocks of those two. You know what I mean? And so, and only the priests' lands Joseph did not take over, since the priests had a fixed allowance from Pharaoh and lived off the allowance of Pharaoh granted to them and did not sell their land. Joseph told the people, now that I have acquired you and your land for Pharaoh, here is your seed for sowing the land, but when the harvest is in, you must give a fifth to the Pharaoh, while you keep 4/5. Tax master. Seeds for your fields and your families. Damn, and so they did a whole tax system for that Pharaoh. Now every year, come on, bring it in, yo. Woo! They had the land, but because of this bag 'em tag 'em plan, Joseph hooked up Pharaoh up with ownership of the land when he just had the capital. Now he's got all the land, and they got to pay him just to live on it. Ooh. And I just got done watching the Waukesha parade attack, and then the Aaron Haruf attack, the face eater. So the Christmas parade attacker, it was crazy seeing how he just goes off on the judge. Doesn't even understand that when you object, you don't object to the judge, you object to the prosecution. Like we're not realizing the judge is going to sentence him, and she did. She threw the book at him. But how the witnesses were cordial and quiet, and when they did get a chance to speak at the victim impact statement, they they said very choice words and collected themselves in a very composed way, and did not say things in the most offensive way, but in subtle ways of demeanor and decorum. But here comes a different situation, and this is the different laws of justice. I don't believe the victims' families of Aaron Wolf, the face eater in Florida, were poor. They wanted to say it was because, he got basically the Brock Turner sentence. Rich white boy, college student, big future. Just made a choice, and so he's going to get locked into crazy. And I don't really believe in the insanity defense. Like, if somebody's going to do an awful crime, of course they're crazy. So you can't just say because you're crazy you did it. Well, because of course you're crazy. So if the punishment doesn't apply to you, it doesn't apply to anybody. But I don't really believe in punishment anyway. Though I do believe in, corrections and things like that. But the punishment is what this is all about, because Jesus underwent the ultimate punishment, and as God, there was this certain deicide involved, and I wouldn't claim anybody's responsible for deicide. Like, oh, you said blood on your hands. No, this is a story in a book that I was brought up with, But it's just living in Western society with a strong church, especially like in Germany and stuff, that this idea that someone's going to label you the J word or claim you committed the D word, then this is nothing new. I mean, you can't now say, "Oh, I must shut everyone up to make sure nobody can claim this on me," because you've already built up these terms already existed throughout all history, or at least for the last 1,000 years or 800 years or whatever. So that's where we are today. We're not shifting where we are and revising it that fast. And so I wanted to go over some Bible verses in my Bible, and it says here in Ephesians 4:7, the to one but to one each of us was given grace according to measure of the gifts. So what's endowed to you by Christ is the measure. In Greek, it's metron, where we get meter. So meter is like, remember Jesus said, the measure you meet for someone else is going to be met to you. So judge not lest you be judged. And remember James said, it's not the hearers of law, but the doers. Remember Jesus said, at Matthew 25, the sheep and the goats, that what you did for the least of his brethren. And when you jump up to I think 417 I want to address. 417 says, "This therefore I say and witness in the Lord, no more you walk as the nations walk, in vanity of the mind of them." So why is Ephesians are Gentiles mostly? So why is Paul saying don't walk like Gentiles? Well, I'll tell you why. Because because the King James version, it says like the other Gentiles. So that's distorting what it means. It's not saying like the other Gentiles. There's no word other. I'm looking at the Greek right now. That's why I'm reading it right now. I'm reading it in the Greek. And for that reason, it's there's no other. It doesn't say other. That's an interpolation. And I have a problem with the King James, because King James was written was the commissioned the same dude that was commissioned the same game that commissioned Shakespeare, and Shakespeare wrote The Merchant of Venice. So he believed in this, racialized concept of Judaism, and that's not true. It's never been the case. It's now how dispensationalists think, and they've gotten people to the point where they say, oh, this person's a messianic J, or this person's a self-hating J, but they're always a J. They're always that as their identity, no matter what they believe. And that's how Israel treats them today. That's how Chabad wants them. They want this belief that there's these certain people that are just who they are, that God put specialness to them, and they can't help but live in your society, even though they don't like you. But it's not that they don't like you, it's that you don't like them. And that's the story. It's the same one over and over and over again. And this is the people behind Israel today. Oh, you can't live in this society. Even though we got rid of religion, freedom for religion is freedom from religion, which we're told. We got rid of it so that people who weren't that religion didn't have to play by the same religious rules, and just made, like in Masonic USA, Dutch Free Trade USA, that we're not going to pay these tariffs and stuff. We're not going to pay these royal portions, because that's how we were enslaved. We need to be free from this. And now they're raking in money hand over foot today based on these rules. And they got us down to the bare minimum, the very bare minimum, every one of us. And it says here, the metron. What is the metron? That's the meter. Like songs have a meter. That's the length. So how we level up to each other, it's like, I'm so important that you need to do more to meet up with me. But that's not how Paul sees it. Paul is saying, even though you're the leader, you're actually a servant. Remember, Jesus washed his servants' feet? So here in Galatians 4, the verse is 21. Tell me, you that desire to be under the law, do you not hear the law? All right, so if you hear the law, you got to do the law. Remember, James says, not just to hear is the law, you got to do it. So for it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondmaid, the other by a free woman. But he who was the bondwoman was born after the flesh. But he who was of the free woman was by the promise, which things are an allegory. For these are two covenants, the one from Mount Sinai, which gendereth bondage, which is Agar. And this Agar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. Remember? And answereth to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with their children. But Jerusalem, which is above, is free. which is the mother of us all. For it is written, rejoice, thou bearest that bearest not. Break forth and cry, thou that travailest not. For the desolate hath much more children than he with a husband. Or, I mean, as James says, this is from Isaiah. This verse right there is from Isaiah. The same Isaiah that James quotes when he says, the flower dies. And so this is what Paul was saying in Romans 11:25. It was in the negative sense that by including all these Gentiles and negatively applying it to Israel, that's how all Israel will be saved. By calling a new people Israel, remember in the kingdom, Isaiah 66, he says he's going to find all these people and he's going to choose these new priests and stuff like that. They're just going to randomly be called priests now. You're now a Levite, you're now this, and so you have Romans 8, now you can cry out to Abba when you get to take on this new identity, the God of Israel, the Israel of God, and so this is what he's saying, that in this way, with this mystery of inclusion of the Gentiles. Remember Isaiah 54, the tent pegs get spread out, strengthen the stakes as the tent pegs and the tents and the ropes get longer to the east and to the west, and you take over all these people, and they all get put under the tent. They're grafted in. And so this is the Messianic age. Paul is being a witness to it. This is what his mission is, that the fulfillment has come, the Messiah has come, and that the nations are now, as Isaiah said, becoming part of the promise, And so I mean to preach now, but I want to go now to Galatians 6:7. It says, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever a man soweth, that he shall reap." So this is something to keep in mind as I go through these next verses. Just please keep in mind, what you sow is what you reap. Remember when I said, like, the master and the servant? That if you're just, peeing down on those below you and having that disgusting treatment of them, that this is going to come around and bite you, because you think, hey, you need to stand there and take this. That you're giving a Christian what they want. When you say, I'm first, you get behind me, you're giving a Christian what they want, because you're giving them their salvation. That Christianity is spiritual martyrdom, and always has been. And this was copied by Islamism. But like I was saying about Jesus being Israel, this was true in the Old Testament too. That very much the New Testament is a summary, a replacement for the Old Testament. Yes, we still have the Old Testament to reference back to, but this has a lot to do with the historical purpose of it. That this is an ontological faith. So when the New Testament happened, it doesn't mean that the Old Testament isn't true. It means that it's no longer true. That there's a cross, that something's changed. It's switched up. So I'm going to go to John 9:41. Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you see, your guilt remains." Well, I'll tell you who said you were guilty. It was the accuser of the brethren, which is the dragon, which is Satan. But remember what Paul said, that Satan comes disguised as a messenger of light. It could be somebody, your own preacher, who is working for Satan. to deceive you. You just got to know them by their fruits. If they're lying in wait to eat you up, they're a lion. If they're giving their gifts to meet your needs, as it says here in Ephesians 4, it says, as a prisoner for the Lord, I urge you to live with life worthy of calling you to be received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another with love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit of the bond of peace. There's one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope. You were called one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all. This is throwing all Christians into being those that are espousing the God of Israel, and then therefore Paul is getting grace from God of spreading his God to the Gentiles. And he who also descended to the lower earthly regions, he who is descended is the very one. He who descended is the very one who ascended higher than all the heavens in order to fill the whole universe. It is he who gave some to be apostles, blah blah, to prepare God's people for works of service. Works of service. Works of service. Until we can, through the unity of faith and the fullness, knowledge of the Son of God. Man, a complete measure. The statue. This is the measure. This is a new measure. Christ, he didn't open his mouth. He didn't complain. The complainers are the problem because they're complaining about you. That's the problem. It's not that you complain. It's that they're complaining about you. They're complaining about people who they're slandering that aren't there to defend themselves. People who might even never be able to defend themselves. And so I'm moving on to, it says, who's blind? Well, Paul tells you who's blind. Those that oppose Jesus Christ. And who is Jesus Christ? The one that didn't accuse anybody, didn't complain. That he is the measure. So he's saying he's low. He's washing their feet. He's down here. Even though he's great, he's the highest God. He's down there. So who's the one who's the accuser of the brethren? It says right here, Matthew 23:2, the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Jesus was killed for blasphemy. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do. They're telling you what to do. You're the hearer of the law. If somebody tells you to walk a mile, walk two. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works. So here they think they're up here. They're telling you do all this to come up here to where I am, when really they could be down here, but they're not even, because they're not even doing anything. They might just seem like they're up there. For they bind heavy burdens hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders. But they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. So, but they believe that they've done so much. All this praying and fasting and afflicting the flesh, all these sacrifices, these holocausts for God. When God said, if I was hungry, I wouldn't tell you. I'm all powerful. It says here in Job 35:6, if you have sinned, what do you accomplish against him? Like, did that affect God? What did you do to God? God don't care if you sinned. God, when you're a boss, you're not worried about somebody taking a piece of candy. You got better things to do. And if your transgressions are multiplied, what do you do to him? You don't do anything to God. You know what God cares about? When you sin against your brother. I'm here in Philippians 2. It says, but if even I, being poured out as a drink offering, this is what I'm talking about. So Paul is saying, if by making myself lower, then I'm more relatable. Then I'm in service to Christ. Then Christ is in me. If I'm being poured out as a drink offering, all these words is one word in Greek. So the translation does not do it justice. It's spendomai. Kai spendomai. Even poured out. Even if Allah I kai spendomai. But even if I am being poured out as a drink offering, and sacrifice, Thesia, and liturgy, service. We just read about service when we were reading Ephesians 4, that Paul, to be in Jesus Christ, is in service to his subjects, the people that listen to him. In Judaism, the rabbi, his feet get washed by the servant, because the servant is not greater than the master. But do you know what Jesus said? You're going to go undergo persecution. You might have to be poured out. And so he said in Matthew chapter 5. Let me go there. Matthew 5:41 is where he said what I said earlier. He said, if someone tells you to walk a mile, go 2. Not because you need to go 2 for your own good, but that person needs you to. That person needs you to. These Pharisees need you to. They needed all their subjects to be doing all these things. Like the workers that came there at dawn and worked all day long. And then these people come later. They want the same reward, the same coin. They got there right before dusk. They want the same coin. But it says here in 25, settle matters quickly with your adversary. If somebody's accusing you, that's what an adversary is. That's how you settle with your adversary, the plaintiff. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way. Or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will not get out until you've paid the last penny. So you need to walk 2 miles. In doing so, you're walking together. Paul said to be as one. Paul said to be as one body. And when you're doing this, even if this person is representing the devil, you're heaping up coals on them, hot coals. This love burns them like a vampire, like a vampire with a cross. It burns them. You're heaping up coals. So everything from the Bible, Jesus does so even more. It says, like, oh, this person prophesied, or they spoke for God, or they exist as the image of God on earth, and they take on human form, the Son of God. How much more Jesus? How much more would Jesus be these things? And a prophet too, because as I said, he foretold of destruction of the temple. It says, therefore, if there is any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection of mercy, fulfill my joy, be by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition and conceit, but lowliness of mind. Let each esteem others better than himself. So, like, what we do is we always think we're getting the short end of the break. We're not getting a good deal. When all reality, you're getting a pretty fair deal. I'm getting a pretty fair deal. And when we esteem somebody else to get that, we might even be doing ourselves a favor to appreciate what we have, to show us humility and how we can rejoice in someone else's gain, and how good the things we have are, our gifts, our meter, how we meet the occasion, our God-given providence. God has bestowed gifts, and that's how we pour out our gifts in service to each other. And this is the meter, this that we have to meet, where we don't accuse anybody. So we come low, but we go high. These others come high and go low. It's the complete opposite. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, the Imago Dei. This is something that caused so much beef with the Jewish folk against the Romans, that all their gods looked like them, that their kings were sons of God. And so here's Jesus, who's everything perfectly Jewish and is still the Son of God. And he, being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself. He rose himself from the dead. He made himself of no reputation. He has the power, taking the form of a bondservant, coming in the likeness of men, and being found in the appearance as a man. He humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. Therefore, God also has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above all names, that the name of Jesus every knee shall bow. And this doesn't mean one day everyone's going to be in Jerusalem, God's going to force them all to bow. That's not what that means. It means once you die and you see who God is, you'll know who God is, and those on earth and those under heaven, and that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, and to the glory of God the Father. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not in my presence only, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Well, guess what? Guess what? He just talked about fear and trembling in the last letter. He says, bondservants. Remember, Jesus was a bondservant. Be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, the scribes and Pharisees, the ones that sit at Moses' seat. With fear and trembling, fear the Pharisees. They'll hand you over to synagogues, councils, synods, like they did Jesus Christ. Jesus warned of this. Paul warned of this. Paul went through this. But he's okay. We're going to be okay because this is a religion of martyrdom. And Paul realized this when he was killing Christians. He said in Philippians 3:6, what do you say? What do you say? He said, concerning zeal, persecuting the church. Concerning zeal. persecuting the church. This is what he means in 1 Timothy 15 when he said, I was chief of all sinners. But even if it wasn't in martyring saints, still, this is how people should look at it. Maybe he was chief of all sinners. He martyred saints. But maybe this is how we all should look at it. Who are we to judge anyone? Take the speck out of your own eye, Matthew 7:5, before you try to take the log out of another. And it says here in Ephesians 4, verse 14, it says, what am I doing here? Okay, it says here in Ephesians 4:14. It says, oh, let's do 17 real quick. It says 16. Measure of each one part part that makes the growth of the body for building itself in love. Agape. That's how we measure each other, with love, without judgment, with concern. Get this. It says, I wanted to say this earlier when I was talking about Herod being Jewish. It says, from Miriam's union with Caleb, sprang the royal house of David. Legends of the Jedis, Lewis Ginsburg. From Miriam, that's Moses' daughter. But remember, Herod married a Miriam too, who was the priest's daughter. From Miriam's union. So we have the third generation, like Agrippa would certainly be, and that's what Paul said. So Caleb sprang the royal house of David. So it says here in 14, in order that no more we may be infants, being blown and carried around by every wind of teaching in the sleight of men, in the cleverness and craftiness. The craftiness is these methods. The other word is liturgy. So when it talks about service, that's liturgy. So even though people use the term liturgy to talk about what they mean it as, it's not what it really means. In Greek, it just means mode. It can mean the operation, their function, their service. And so, because we have the term liturgy in the Bible before people started using it. So that's where we know what it means, not from how we use it today. And so it says here of agape in verse 14 of Ephesians 4, but it says here in verse 17 or 4:14, it says, not to the craftiness, the methods. This is what Methodism is. This is like with all the rolling on the ground, getting bit by snakes and talking in tongues. It's to get money and stuff like that. Jesus said, pray in your closet. Let it be personal. People are always taking the Lord's name in vain. And everything they do in this life, it says, put ye on the whole armor of God to be able to stand against the craftiness, the methods of the devil, the Diablo. So that's about all I wanted to say today. But I'm calling it quits, yo. I'm calling it quits. I want to get into my teaching, so I beg you all to keep me in your prayers. Now I'm going to take the Lord's name in vain. I just beg you all to take the torch. Let me pass the torch. Somebody else I wish would, and people have been. People, you've been doing great, but I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not doing this for views. I'm not doing this out of hate. I'm not doing this so people like me. I'm not doing this for any reason other than I feel like people don't understand the Bible. And I'm not here to teach. I'm just here to bring it to your attention that it's not saying what you think it is about this future metaphysical cosmic people. They had no idea when like Don K. Preston, yeah, this happened in the Roman era, but Daniel didn't know about the Roman era. Daniel had no idea. The only reason Jesus knew about the end of the temple, if Jesus is this physical guy on earth that lived in human form without powers from on high, if he lowered himself, the only reason he knew about the temple being destroyed is because it happened after the fact. And this is true for all of it. It was after exile that, the temple's going to be destroyed, the first temple. It was after exile that they said the first temple is going to be destroyed. And then you can take on a certain theistic reason for that, but that doesn't mean that's what happened. It's an allegory to understand. It's important. I don't feel that my religion is very weak, I'm reading the Bible as much as anybody, thinking about it, about spirituality, and trying to have a relationship with as much of a God as I think exists. I try to have as much faith in the world, but you can only get so far. It's not supposed to be known. That's the whole point. If it was known, then it wouldn't be faith. All right. I'm out. Peace.